What's up, everybody? We're here after quite a long vacation. We were gone for about a week, but we're back. This is Blake&VishSports. Sports. That's Blake. I'm Vish. And we're here to talk about Julio Jones and him going to the Falcons. And we're here to do a little bit of NFC West ranking and a bunch of different things. Blake, what's up? How does it feel to be back?
Doing pretty good. I'm excited. NBA playoffs are starting, so there's actually quality sports on TV because NBA regular season is just really not all that enticing. But NBA playoffs is always awesome because you see some rivalries and just like high intensity basketball. So I'm excited for that. And then, of course, NFL training camp and more random rumors are going around. So that's always exciting. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
man, I love talking about rumors. It's my favorite thing to
Yeah,
talk about, the
exactly.
most inexact thing. You know what I mean? But we're here, and there's a lot of smoke around Julio Jones, so we got to talk about Julio. So let's start there. So obviously, a lot has happened in the week we were gone in terms of Julio Jones. Obviously, Niners fans really want Julio Jones. But first, let's just start with a broad statement. Let's not talk about the 49ers right away. We'll get there. We're going to be talking about the Niners a lot in this show. But let's just talk about Julio Jones in general. Where will Julio Jones be traded, in your opinion, Blake? Where should he be traded? Should the Falcons trade him? Let's answer all three of these questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we should start with should even the Falcons trade Julio Jones? And I know this was talked about a lot right after the season ended when they had another year finishing with a under 500 record since 2017 when they made it far, 2016 when they played the Patriots. And since then, they've just kind of been slowly toppling down. And this was an offseason where a lot of people thought, okay, they'll maybe trade Matt Ryan, maybe trade Julio. And then they went out and they restructured Matt Ryan, committing to him for the future. And that makes you think, okay, it looks like they're going to give it a go one or two more years, like with this roster, try to build up the defense. And then all of a sudden, Julio Jones wants out and they're thinking of trading him. And it's for me, it's like, okay, why would you commit to your quarterback if you're going to get rid of your best offensive weapon? I know they drafted Pitts. I know Ridley's good, but still, it's not like they really have a running back, and their receiving options besides Julio aren't that great outside of the two guys I mentioned. So that's where, to me, it's a little confusing on why they would actually trade him. But yeah, do you think the same way as I do, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So in regards to should they actually trade him, I'm 100% with you. Like once they didn't draft a quarterback, I thought this talk would die down because I thought like Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, and Julio Jones, who only played 9 games, but when he played, he was still a top 2 or 3 receiver in the NFL. Like
He
with
was really
Matt
good.
Ryan and in Arthur Smith's offense, like the Falcons could have the best offense in the NFL next year. Like, oh my God, like absolutely keep him. But this talk continues, so I don't know why. Like, sure, like Kyle Pitts is incredible. Calvin Ridley is a really, really underrated player. But like you talked about, the run game, like they don't have a back that they're gonna lean on right now in the run game. And they didn't really particularly address that in the draft either. And that's where I look at it and you go, Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, that is loaded. And that's why I don't think they should trade him. But we're here. There's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of rumors around this. So obviously we got to talk about it. So I got to ask you the next question then. Now that we think that he's going to be traded, even though we don't think the Falcons should, where do you think that place is?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of teams like rumored to be in on him or in the talks. 49ers, Patriots, Colts, Ravens. I'm sure there's a bunch more that I didn't mention that are bigger markets that are just there. I know the Cowboys are one of the teams that are on. You can bet on the Cowboys to get him. And I find that absolutely hilarious, just the fact that they need a fourth receiver who's above average. So that's funny. But yeah, I think the team that stands out to me the most is the team with probably the worst receiving core in the league, even after free agency. They only got a couple guys, one being Nelson Aguilar, who he did look good on the Raiders last year, but still I don't trust him as my number one. And then Kendrick Bourne, former 49er, who didn't really do as good as people thought would, but I would say the Patriots are the team that, yes, they have 2 tight ends. They have Mac Jones, but having an elite, and I still think Julio's elite. I mean, yes, he did miss games, but in the 9 games, he had, I think, like damn near 800 yards, and his average yards per game last year was 85. If you compare that with the rest of the NFL's total, that's still top 5 all time, which is just dumbfounding, and people say he sucks. So I don't know where that's all coming from. Yeah, the injuries are concerning, but a team like the Patriots, who did sign a lot of guys, but they still have cap space. This year they still have a little over 15 million, and then in 2022 they'll have like 24 million, and that's per over the cap. So they have the cap space to do it. They have picks. They haven't shelled out a bunch of future firsts or anything like that. So that, from a financial standpoint, makes sense to me. And then I did want to break down some of the numbers that if he is traded June 1st for the Falcons and for the team that gets him. So for the Falcons, they would have 7.75 million dead cap the next 3 years. And then the team that gets him next year, so in 2021 would pay him 15 million, and then 2022 and 3 would pay him 11.5 million. So that's very reasonable for how good Julio is. So I think the Patriots are the team that just need to go and get him, and having an elite pass catcher along with 2 above average tight ends. They already have a really good line. They already have a really good run game, which we've hit on a few times. And then they have someone who could step in and be just a precision thrower in Mac Jones, or if not, Cam Newton. So that, for me, is the team that I look at and I say they would benefit the most, and financially it does make sense. But who do you think?
Yeah, I think you outlined all the points, and it's weird because we don't usually agree this much, especially this early, but I'm 100% with you. I think the Patriots are the team that makes the most sense because when they have a genuine need for a number 1 receiver, like you talked about Aguilar and Bourne, it's not that Aguilar and Bourne are bad. It's that you look at Aguilar and Bourne very differently if you have Julio Jones with them. You then look at Julio Jones, Aguilar, and Bourne, and you go, wow, the Patriots have a pretty solid receiving core. They have 3 kind of reliable guys, especially, I would say, of those guys, I would say I actually believe more in Bourne than I do in Aguilar. Sounds kind of weird to say because Niners fans think Bourne is kind of unreliable because he occasionally has timely drops, but he plays every game and he's kind of consistent with his production. Aguilar is a little bit more like there's one season like the Eagles Super Bowl season where you go, wow, Nelson Aguilar is not a bust. He's really turned around. He's a great weapon. And then a year later, you got a guy in Philadelphia on a video saying he catches, I think, children better than Nelson Aguilar catches football. So he's inconsistent. But if you add Julio Jones to those 3, like that's incredible. Then you have Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, incredible offensive line. I still think Cam Newton is not a bad quarterback. I don't know why he has this reputation. I think if he gets the opportunity to start all 16 games this year, he will win the comeback player of the year. That's just a prediction I'm going to make right now, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I also really liked Mac Jones before the draft. I liked him a lot at 15 to New England. I think when we ranked landing spots for quarterbacks, we both said that Mac Jones had the 2nd best landing spot. And I think Julio is an incredible fit for their offense. Like the most underrated thing about Julio Jones to me, and it doesn't get talked about enough, is his route running for a guy of his size and his speed.
Yeah.
His ability to cut in and out, his ability to be smooth in and out of breaks, his ability to have an explosive first step and beat press coverage and all of that doesn't get talked about enough. So he's actually more than capable of running a lot of the Julian Edelman routes that require sudden change of direction. He has that absolute ability. And then he would add something the Patriots haven't had since Randy Moss, the ability to just test defenses vertically and just beat defensive backs with raw speed. He's an incredible football player. And I think New England, whatever they got to do to make it happen, they should. Because honestly, I really think New England's going to be a playoff team next year. I look at their defense. I think their defense is going to be really, really good, especially when you bring back Dante Hightower. I look at their offensive line. I think we've talked about it before. They have a really good offensive line and a very good run game. Both those things will be there next year. And you add Julio Jones, I think, regardless of whether it's Mac Jones, regardless of whether it's Cam Newton, with their coaching, their defense, their ability to run the football, they will be very successful. So I think they should try and get Julio Jones. I mean, Also, wouldn't it just be the Patriots to get buy great value on a
Yeah,
future Hall
exactly.
of Famer and to have him finish out his career with 3 or 4 more great seasons with them? It just feels like they do that every time. They've done it with so many different guys, and
Mhm.
it would just feel apropos for them to do it with Julio Jones too.
And with Cam, like people like players in the NFL love Cam, and I know Julio would love to play with Cam. So even if Cam's not the starter, and if he is, I think he probably will start the season as a starter. Like Julio would want to be with Cam. So that's also another like sort of incentive for him to actually go there. So yeah, that would just Julio on the Patriots would be annoying. I mean, they already had Randy Moss, they already had Gronk, they've had a ton of other good receivers. And there's definitely a hole there compared to most other teams. So I think I think both of us can agree the Patriots would be the best landing spot for him, just all things considered. But uh, other teams too, like maybe the Colts would be a really good landing spot, or you could even say the Ravens. I don't know if their cap space would allow for that. I don't think it will when they have to pay Lamar, but
Uh,
that would be
so
scary.
So the Colts obviously would make sense, but I think given that they just gave money to T.Y. Hilton, I mean, I still think they believe in Paris Campbell a lot. I mean, I have nothing to say about
Pittman,
this other than the fact that they spent a second round pick on him and he was good in college. And
yeah,
Pittman really showed something at the end of last
he
year.
did.
So I think the Colts should be optimistic about their trio where it's like if I have to give up a second round and a third round pick for Julio Jones, it might not be what I want to do at this moment, even though Julio Jones is still a top 5 receiver and he's a future first ballot Hall of Famer. For the Patriots, it's like if you get Julio Jones, you go from this playoff contender to this Super Bowl contender. And I do want to mention something with Cam Newton. I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff about Cam Newton's inaccuracy. Have been a few ugly throws over the years, especially last year, that have been put on Twitter and people have discussed them. Here's a stat, though, with Cam Newton that people don't talk about enough, right? We talked about in 2019, there was a lot of talk about Tom Brady's receivers, right? How bad they were. Cam Newton played with worse receivers last year. He played with the same receivers as Brady, but with a more banged up Edelman, with no offseason and playing in a brand new system. Do you know that he had if you remove spikes and throwaways, he had a higher on target pass percentage than
Mhm.
Tom Brady in 19? This is Cam Newton in 20.
What is that like an on target stat? Like just
It's
like
basically just
or something?
it's an on target charting of your throws. Tom Brady in 19 was 73.9% on target. Cam
Mm.
Newton was 74.6. Cam Newton had a 65 point completion percentage. Tom Brady had a 60.8. Cam Newton had a higher
Mm.
yards per attempt than Tom Brady. Cam Newton had a higher yards per completion, and he was also a higher percentage under pressure. Although Brady's pressure stats are always a little bit misleading because with any
He gets the
offensive line,
ball out so
Brady,
fast.
right, he gets the ball out so quickly. So the point is that, like, it's not to say that Cam Newton is going to be Tom Brady next year. He's going to go win a Super Bowl or anything. It's just I don't think people are realizing how poor that supporting cast was around him in New England, and the
Agreed.
fact that he's still a solid player. And now Mac Jones, they might start Mac Jones, they might go that route and all of that, but that doesn't mean Cam
Mhm.
Newton isn't solid.
No, I agree with you. I think that's a great point on Cam Newton, but we can go to the Niners angle of this, and I'm sure Niners fans are just banging their hand on the glass here or on the table, wanting Julio and the fact that it's Julio Jones and he's available for a trade. And it seems like Niners fans just anytime a player who's good is available for trade, they want him, and especially for a position that is, I would say, more of a need than most people think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that because, I mean, like in theory, right? Debo and Brandon Ayuk is this very, very exciting young receiver duo, but both have had a little bit of injury issues. Or Brandon Ayuk had 3 different injuries over the course of 2019, 2020. When you start with his core injury over the draft, then his pulled hamstring in camp, and then his ankle injury to end the season. Debo
Mm-hmm.
Samuel has had a history of ankle problems. I mean, hamstring problems, excuse me. Not to mention the Jones fracture he had before the season. So, like, if both of those guys get injured, the depth behind them is a little scary. There's a lot of guys that could be something, but there's no reliable guy. So I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, I would say that third guy is a decent need.
And two, just like even if one of them goes down, you have one of them who's good, like really good, obviously, but like you need more than just one good receiver and Kittle to actually run an efficient offense. So it is a bigger need because right now the depth chart just going to mention Debo Samuel, Ayuk, and then it's something like Richie James, Trent Sherfield, Jalen Hurd, Travis Benjamin, Muhammad Sanu,
Kevin White,
River Craycraft, Benny Fowler, and just more like camp body names. So there's obviously a lot of guys there, but only two of those would you feel really confident in playing a significant amount of snaps, I'd say.
Yeah. And so now let's talk about Julio, right? We've established that the Niners have a need for a third receiver. Now, that receiver doesn't have to be Julio Jones, but if it was Julio Jones, that'd be incredible, right? We're talking about a future Hall of Famer and still one of the, like, Julio Jones would automatically be the best receiver on this team. I know a lot of people love Ayuk. I love Debo. But come on, this is one of the greatest receivers in NFL history. Yeah. Should they trade for him?
I think the Niners would be better off trading for like just some random like average receiver as opposed to
I'll give you a name. I'll give you a name right now. The Jets drafted Elijah Moore. The Niners have a need at slot receiver. What about Jamison Crowder?
Yeah, I mean, I just think value-wise, Crowder would probably be better in the sense that, well, keeping on Julio, like a team like the Niners who's more run-heavy, do they need that number one elite receiver? Well, I mean, the Falcons had it when they had Shanahan, when they had Julio, but around him, they didn't really have too many good receivers. They had Sanu, who was all right, but it was mainly predicated on the fact that Devonta Freeman and Tevin Coleman could just run down people's throats and be so effective at that. So I would say that the Niners would not be needing Julio. I think we can agree they need a third guy, maybe even a fourth guy, you could argue, but trading for Julio and then being a run-first team and having three really good receivers, one of them being just elite, is almost overkill. And then here's the other angle too. Cap space-wise, Bosa and then Kendricks are going to be paid a lot, and I do not foresee them letting
Warner.
Yeah, I do not foresee either of those guys leaving. They're crucial parts of the defense, and I'd say they'll be more valuable to the team than getting a guy like Julio. And then the other part of that is just, would you rather have a star receiver or just like a really good middle linebacker or D end? Because I would probably have the D end in this case. So yeah,
right.
I would say no, but I honestly don't think there's really any reason to. And then the other thing I forgot was the picks. They are lacking picks because of the trade ups. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so you kind of outlined on each one of the points, and I do want to elaborate them more. So like the money problem you talked about, right? If they get rid of Jimmy Garoppolo, money's not a problem for 2021. Here's where money becomes a problem. In 2022, Eric Armstead's cap hit goes above $20 million. Fred Warner will be out of his rookie deal by 2022. I guarantee you Fred Warner's not going to have a backloaded deal. Why? Because he's one of the best players in his position. He's been a Pro Bowler. He's been an All-Pro, and he's about to get paid. He's about to be the highest paid linebacker in the NFL at a time where the linebacker market is about to tip because Darius Leonard is going to be paid. Devin White has one more year before they will take his fifth-year option and touch his contracts. But there's a few more people. Roquan Smith, Tremaine Edmonds. There's a few guys here that are going to get money right here in this offseason or the next one. So the linebacker market is going to be reset right here, and Fred Warner might be the person to do it. So that'll be a high cap hit. George Kittle's cap hit is going to be high. Trent Williams' cap hit, which is very low this year, will increase. And when you add a 32-year-old Julio Jones, right, you start off with money, and it's a little bit of a problem. Okay, Parag can adjust the money, but here's the thing. You touched on it. This is going to be a run-first offense. They just paid a fullback a hell of a lot of money. Not this year, but they give him a long-term contract, which means that in an ideal world, this wants to be a 21 personnel offense. Well, if you want to be a 21 personnel run-first offense, how many mouths are you going to feed? You want to get Ayuk the ball. You drafted him high. You want to get Debo the ball. You drafted him high. George Kittle's the best player on this team. You want to get him the ball. And then you throw in Julio Jones, who, if you're not throwing him the ball 6, 7, 8 times a game, then what are you doing? This is one of the best players in the NFL. So when you go through all of that and the fact that the Niners aren't built to be a drop-back pass team, so having 3 elite receivers is really not useful because even with Trey Lance, and I know everybody's high on Trey Lance, and I'm also high on Trey Lance. I'm so excited he's the quarterback, even though I wasn't high on him before the draft. You know, it's crazy how fandom kind of warps your mind where as soon as they draft him, you're just like the most excited person in the world about him. He's not built to be a drop back quarterback, at least this current year. Jimmy Garoppolo is certainly not a dropping back 35, 40 times type quarterback. So from that standpoint, let's say it takes a second and a third to get Julio Jones. Like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, you have Julio Jones with Kyle Shanahan again. Like, imagine how great that would be. But they don't need to give up more picks like that. You can give up a sixth and get Jamison Crowder, who might be cut by the end of training camp because Elijah Moore is rocking for the Jets, and they don't need Jamison Crowder. And Jamison Crowder, wow, he's nowhere near Julio Jones. He'll never be what Julio Jones is. He might be the perfect balance number 3 that catches 30, 35 balls a game in the season from Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo.
Receiver 3 if he caught 30 passes in a game.
Right. He would be incredible, right? Yeah. And he would be able to kind of, just move the chains. You only really need him for 3rd and 6, 3rd and 5, because ideally the Shanahans don't want to get into 3rd down. And when you do get into 3rd down, they want to be in 3rd and manageable. And that's when they really go into 11 personnel. So I think that, like, in an ideal world, like, it's hard to say don't trade for a Hall of Famer because that's who Julio Jones is. But I just don't see the logical thought process flow for the 49ers, especially where they've allocated their resources and they made it so clear they really want to run the football next year and they want to do it at a high level. I mean, the Aaron Banks pick highlights that. The Jalen Moore pick highlights that. Going and picking Trey Sermon highlights that. They want to run the football next year and they want to throw it only off play action. Yeah, Julio Jones is a hell of a receiver off play action too, but it's like, if you want to run the ball and you already got 2 good receivers, especially 2 incredible receivers that are going to be a part of your run game, I just think you need a 3rd guy. And I think Sterling Shepard's another Jamison Crowder type that you could throw in that conversation. But yeah, it's just a long way of saying Julio Jones, incredible player. Just don't think it makes sense for the 49ers.
He doesn't fit the timeline. And 2, one position group that we didn't even mention is the whole secondary is pretty much on 1-year deals. If Verrett balls out this year, he's going to get a big contract. Ward, Tart, any of the other corners, if any of those guys play extraordinarily well, and obviously you want them to play well, you don't want them to be bad, but if one of them or 2 of them play really well, they're going to get a big contract, and that'll also just cut into the cap further and further. So it doesn't make sense for their timeline, and cutting Jimmy G, whether they actually do that or not is kind of to be seen at this point, but you would really think that it just, I don't know. It doesn't look like they will at this point, but it just, money doesn't add up.
That's actually a great point too, because right, you got 3 guys that are signed only through this year in Verrett, K'Wan Williams, and Tart, and then you go to the 2022 where you have Emmanuel Mosley and Jimmy Ward signed through that. What happens if the Niners are kind of like a 12-5 team? They're right on the precipice. Trey Lance balls out as a rookie and they don't get there, At that point, they would want that money, if Verrett was an important part of that defense, which if he plays, he would be. Same thing with Tart, same thing with K'Wan Williams. All 3, the only question is health, because all 3 are incredible football players when they play. Well, if you're in that situation, right, you would want to run it back, right? Like Trey Lance, 1 year extra. You were just 12-5. You were this incredible football team. Yeah. Well, if you have Julio Jones's contract added in there, you might lose one of those guys, So that's where, if the money, like, it makes sense for 2021. It's easy. It becomes a little more complicated in 2022. I think that's actually a really, really good point. I think that needs to be talked about more because, like, Jason Verrett, if he plays the exact same way he played his last year, that's a top 10 corner in football. So you want to pay him. You want a top 10 corner. It's a premium position. It's a more premium position than receiver. So I think that's another really good point. Yeah. But I think, long story short, we're both kind of in the same spot here. Wow. Second time we've agreed. Julio Jones, incredible player, but just doesn't make sense for the Niners.
And then here's something that we're kind of pushing towards now. Offseason, we love talking about rumors. Nothing is more fun than doing that. But we did, with kind of like a slower offseason, we're planning on doing more like ranking videos and more just like, ranking. Like, we might do a power rankings video too. So let us know if you guys want to do that for each team or maybe each division, give predictions and stuff like that. But the first thing we wanted to do is ranking NFC West position groups. Now, today's episode, we're only doing a few, but if you guys enjoy this content and like us ranking this, we'll do it more. But the first ranking we're going to do, and this is a consensus between me and Vish where we actually agree on all these, but we're ranking the NFC West quarterbacks. So Vish, who do you think is the fourth best quarterback in the NFC West? If you want to give a shout out to someone who just missed the cut, feel free. I mean, Josh Rosen's always a good one. John Walford, Nate Sudfeld, all those guys.
Yeah. I mean, are we doing? We're basically doing position groups, but for quarterback, I think we kind of just went with the starter just because the backup is kind of irrelevant. In this case, the Niners quarterback, the starter is Jimmy G / Trey Lance, and to me, that's the fourth best quarterback. If it's Jimmy G, he is the fourth best quarterback in this division by far. If it's Trey Lance, he's just unknown. He could be the second best quarterback in the division a year from now, but right now he's a rookie. He hasn't played. So that's why, to me, those two are the fourth best quarterback in the division right now. I think we're going to elaborate on the other three, and the other three are very, very good quarterbacks. So it's no shame being fourth best quarterback in this division. I would say the other three are all within the top 15 quarterbacks in the NFL. So there's no shame really in being the fourth guy in this particular ranking. But I would have the Niners fourth here, or the Niners quarterbacks of Trey Lance / Jimmy Garoppolo.
I agree with you on that. And I did just want to say, it's tough to say because Jimmy G is certified for it. You can't really argue that. But Trey Lance, he could be a top 10 quarterback. He could be a top 5 quarterback, or he could be a bottom 5 quarterback. We have no clue how he looks. He has the makings of being one of those high profile guys, but it's tough to say. So that's why we're going with him at fourth. But I would love to visit this a year from now and see if our things have changed at all, because it's more than possible that the order's entirely different. But Vish, who do we have at 3?
Yeah, 3, and this is, to me, this was the hardest ranking, 3 versus 2. And I mean, 3 and 2 are actually two of my favorite quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, I've talked on little individual points how much I like both of these quarterbacks. And I went with Matthew Stafford and the Rams at 3. I know you also agreed with that. I think we have our reasons for Kyler Murray being above Matthew Stafford. But to touch on Matthew Stafford a little bit, this is a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. Incredible arm strength, incredible thrower, pretty good process, great mover within the pocket, can make plays off schedule, just makes so many damn plays in a game, but it gets clouded by the fact that he has to make 100 plays for the Lions to win because they don't run the football, they don't protect the quarterback, they don't play good defense, and he has to do every single thing for them to win the game. I think we're going to see a different Matthew Stafford. I mean, the only reason maybe I have a little reservations is even though I think him and McVay are going to be great, we just haven't seen it yet. I think there's a good chance Matthew Stafford might have a close to MVP season. I wouldn't be surprised if he has that season with McVay next season. And we go, holy cow. We put Matthew Stafford at 3rd, and he's a top 7 quarterback in the NFL. And wow, what were we thinking? But, Matthew Stafford, incredible football player, but to me, he's 3rd. And there's one particular reason why I have Kyler Murray above him, even though I do think with Kyler Murray, there are some things to be concerned about that have popped up over the last 2 years that he needs to improve on. Obviously, he's only 2 years into his NFL career, so you would hope he can. He's really young and he's really talented. But yeah, to me, he's 3. I think you want to elaborate more because I know you also agreed with me on this one.
Yeah, I had Stafford at 2. Obviously, being a Packers fan, my team had to face him twice a year. So I was never scared of their team just because it's the Lions, and the Packers have just owned the Lions over the past, inception of both franchises pretty much. But Matthew Stafford can strike fear into anyone. I mean, you mentioned it, he hasn't yes, he had Calvin Johnson for a number of years, which helps a lot, but over the past few years, having Galladay and Marvin Jones, it's not like they've had anything crazy. He went the longest time without having a 100-yard rusher, which was always brought up. I mean, they had Javid Best, who was pretty cool and stuff, but never really had a good running game. The O-line hasn't been great. They had a really good defense for a few years, but coaching leaves a little bit to be desired, and same with the front office. But I do really like the fact that his arm is just like, I'd say probably top 5 in the league. I wouldn't say 1 or 2, but I'd say 5 or 6. You could definitely make a case for that. So he makes all the throws there. Out of the pocket, can do the same. I think you've seen it, Vish, but against, I believe it was the Browns, he threw a touchdown pass with like a torn rotator cuff. And
As a rookie.
it was like a mic'd up moment. And just, he puts it all on the line, and he's an awesome player. So he's obviously great. You mentioned top 12. I would have him somewhere in there too. It's kind of hard to rank them all. I'd have to think about it more, but he's in that category. The only thing with me is he is a lot older than Murray, and injury concerns a little bit there over the last few years, especially his body's broken down. He's missed more games than usual because he was an Ironman. But yeah, that's the main reason I would just have him a little lower. And he also just hasn't shown the ability where he has taken over games, but Kyler's done the same in shorter amounts of time too. But
wait, I have a question real quick. You have Stafford at 3, right?
Yes.
Okay. You said 2 at the beginning, so it's just a little bit confused.
Yeah. I have him at 3 along with you, but we both have Kyler at 2. Why do you have him at 2, Vish?
Yeah, it's really the running. I think that's what separates Kyler from Matthew Stafford. Like, I would say in terms of functioning from the pocket, Stafford's actually still the better quarterback. Like Kyler Murray, there are still some concerns with how he processes, whether he can see, because he does pass up middle of the field routes like Russell Wilson, like other quarterbacks who aren't very tall and can't see over offensive line and see throws over the middle of the field. But I think, obviously, Kyler Murray, when it comes to arm strength, Kyler Murray also has a very, very strong arm. He has a really quick release. He drops back deep in the pocket and can touch every part of the field. Incredible deep ball thrower. But to me, the running is really what kind of separates him. And for whatever reason in the NFL, we have this taboo where quarterback rushing stats, it's not included. Like, you had 26 touchdowns and 12 interceptions, Kyler Murray. But if you ran for 8 more touchdowns, that doesn't count in your stats. Like, it's not like you ran for those. And I don't know why that is. His running is actually like really incredible. It's a little Michael Vick like. I mean, he ran for 800 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. Are you kidding me? He's so fast. He's so quick. He's impossible to tackle one-on-one. He's the only explosive element to their offense last year, and I would say he carried their offense. A lot of people would question his mental process and say that's what hurt him in the second half of this year. I would say no. I would say his mental process was kind of stagnated. Like it wasn't the best even through the first 8 weeks of the year. It was just that he got hurt and he banged up his shoulder, and I don't think he's as confident running around and making plays. But, I mean, you look at and his throwing is obviously incredible too. Like the throw of the Hail Mary to DeAndre Hopkins to beat the Bills. That's one of the best throws of the NFL. Like he's running full speed to his left and he just flips his hip and rockets the ball 55 yards. He's an incredible football player. I think him and Matthew Stafford are like right around the same area. They're probably in the same tier of quarterback. I would just say that I would have Kyler Murray just a little bit in front just because of that running element. And I think that's really important because 800 yards and 11 touchdowns is not empty production. That's real stats. And those 11 touchdowns do make a difference. When you account for 37 touchdowns in a season, that's unbelievable.
I think the running too, and this doesn't get brought up enough, where when you're behind a O-line that's maybe not as good as others, like you can just bail them out. Like just flat out bail them out by being able to evade someone who, sheds a tackle or sheds a blocker really quickly. And he has done that time and time again where, the play will break down and there's a guy in his face and he'll just either loop around or just run around him and pick up like 5 yards or whatever. And that's the stuff that puts me over the edge or puts him over the edge for me with Stafford. And Stafford's not bad at running. Like he's not the slowest of slowest. He can take a hit. He's a big guy, but he's nowhere near as quick, not even in the same realm of quickness as Kyler. And I think him and you see this with Lamar all the time too. And they're just overall like elusiveness and ability to change direction where when they're in the open field, like they're definitely like the hardest guys to tackle compared to like a receiver or a running back, and that they are so quick and they'll just juke you out of your shoes. So that for me with Kyler, and you mentioned his shoulder. No one talked about this last year, but you saw in this, I think it was the Seahawks Thursday night game where you just see him like icing his shoulder, and clearly they lost a few games after that and his throwing was nowhere near as good. And I think that's a big part as to why like their team slowed down and why he slowed down. But yeah, I mean, he was obviously phenomenal this last year, and I'm excited to see them. They have a few more weapons. They got AJ Green, they got Rondale Moore, and they bolstered their receiving core even more because they have Hopkins, obviously. But around that, Kirk and Andy Isabella is maybe not the best. We'll see with Fitz, but I think they'll be improved this year, and we get to see year 3 of Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, which will be exciting.
Yeah. And the other thing about Kyler I wanted to mention also is that he is their run game. Like, they don't have a very creative run game scheme. They don't run the football particularly well. Like, they get bailed out by the fact that Kyler Murray can run for 85 yards in a game, and he can change the game with either his legs or his arm. So he does make a massive impact overall as a football player, even if there are questions with his ability to execute and his processing, because he's so physically gifted. And that brings us to one. I think everybody knew who one was going to be before this topic started. He's been the best quarterback in the NFC West since about 2013 or 2014. It's obviously Russell Wilson, even though he had a down year last year, and there were some things that popped up that have always existed with Russell Wilson that I thought were maybe exasperated because of the number of times he threw the football. But is there much more to say about Russell Wilson? I mean, the guy is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, perennial top 5 quarterback, I feel. Obviously, the beginning of the year, he was looking like MVP, and the media was a little too hype on him maybe, and kind of fell back to earth. And I know their offense coordinator got fired. They haven't always had the best run game considering the injuries. And then you take into the fact that, yeah, I mean, Metcalf and Lockett are really good, but besides that, they didn't really have another receiver that was, or tight end that was ideal for their role. So he's always worked or done a lot with a little. And I just wanted to mention that 2019, if you take a look at just what the Seahawks did and you look at their roster at the end of the year, he was actually just dragging that team to a insanely good record. I believe they went 13-3. And their team was just, they had like virtually no talent on offense. And the fact that they were able to get that far just speaks volumes to how valuable and how much they lean on Russell Wilson. And I know we've brought this up a lot, Vish, but he might have the best deep ball in the league. It is just a straight moonshot, so much air under it, always right on the receiver's chest. So I think Russell Wilson's top 5 quarterback still. I know he did not look good against the Rams or end of the year in general, but yeah, Russell Wilson's definitely the number 1 quarterback in the NFC West.
Yeah, by far. And he didn't have the best season. Like, there were a lot of things to be concerned about. Like, he was just not seeing the field. He wasn't seeing open receivers. He ran himself into sacks. He still managed to throw for 40-something touchdowns. He's just an incredible football player. Every year, Seattle's roster looks like it's 3rd or 4th in the NFC West, and by week 10, they're 8-2, and Russell Wilson's having another great season. It's just how it is, and that's what happens when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's an incredible football player. He's by far the best quarterback in the NFC West. Once again, Seattle will have a great chance because he's their quarterback. I hate being so complimentary, but the guy is just an incredible football player. And you talked about the deep ball. I mean, to me, it's got to be in the conversation as one of the best in NFL history. Like, you know, a lot of guys, there's people who can throw maybe the deep ball with more pace, like an Aaron Rodgers. But Russell Wilson on just putting air under it and throwing that moonshot and just having people run under it, it's special. And he doesn't just do it with Metcalf or Lockett. He does it with everybody. I mean, David Moore will catch a moonshot. Right. So just an incredible quarterback. And yeah, so to kind of sum up our rankings, we had Trey Lance / Jimmy Garoppolo 4th. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo is the 4th best quarterback in this division. Trey Lance could be maybe 2nd, maybe 3rd by the end of next year. It's just that he's a rookie. He hasn't played, so he is 4th with Jimmy Garoppolo. Matthew Stafford 3rd, obviously incredible quarterback. We both think he's top 2 in the NFL. Everybody knows how much I love Matthew Stafford. I want him to be the Niners quarterback this year, but he's on the Rams. We think he's going to be incredible with the Rams. Kyler Murray 2nd, above Matthew Stafford, mostly because of his running ability. That makes a giant difference. That is part of what a quarterback does. Kyler Murray is a special runner. 800 yards, 11 touchdowns is special running. And then finally, Russell Wilson 1. I don't think you need to elaborate much more. He's been the best quarterback in this division for a while, and he will probably remain it for the next 5-6 years too.
Yep. So I think we can move on.
Before we go to running backs, I saw this question on here, and I thought it would be a good question for us to answer that's like not about the topics. It was more, can we do a video? I mean, we could possibly do a video. The thing with doing a video that discusses concepts and scheme and breaking down film is that it takes a lot of time to do, for me to just go pull up clips and stuff and Blake, and for us to have some sort of pad where we could show down the personnel. We'll think about it. We'll definitely put it on our to-do list. It's just so much easier to just go watch it ourselves, watch the film, watch all of it, and then come back here and talk about it. But definitely, if there's enough people interested in this, maybe you guys can comment below and tell us you really want us to do this. Then yeah, we'll definitely try and figure out a way to do this. Thank you for this question, though. We'll definitely consider it. Again, it's just up to y'all's interest. Like this ranking stuff, we don't know how it'll do. We just trying to make content that you guys like. And if you guys really want us to do it and you really like it, just let us know and we'll definitely push to do it.
Much agreed. But we can move on to the NFC West running back. So this is not just who's the best. This is just backfield in total. So we're not just going who's the number one running back on each team and ranking them. We're saying, okay, what are the best just total backfields in their entirety? So Vish, I think we are going to have different ones. We're going to have different answers on this. But the fourth one, who do you have as the fourth best backfield in the NFC West?
The fourth best backfield of the NFC West is the easiest answer. It's the easiest answer. It's the Arizona Cardinals. Chase Edmonds, not a bad player, actually, in my opinion. Pretty decent one. Not a running back one in the NFL. James Conner, again, very okay running back. Not a great one, not a bad one. But him and James Conner is your backfield, especially when you have a backfield led by Chris Carson, a backfield led by Cam Akers, who was really exciting as a rookie, and a backfield led by Raheem Mostert and Trey Sermon, who's exciting. And Raheem Mostert, when he plays, is a good back in the NFL and all of that. It's by far the fourth one. I don't know what else to say. It's really just one of the things that concerns me about Arizona, because Cliff Kingsbury's not overly creative with their run scheme. I thought his run game was actually pretty good, especially with what he did with Kenyon Drake at the end of 2019, and 2020 was a disaster running the football for them. They are overly reliant on Kyler Murray's explosiveness and ability to run the football, and I don't expect a lot of that to change, even though Chase Edmonds has been their most effective back the last 2 years. I don't think he's this top upper echelon player that's going to just overcome the scheme and all of that.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I had the Cardinals at 4, and it's more just due to it could be like if these guys were on another team, they'd be solid, but just having only two guys who are probably not like the best quality running back number ones in the league. Now Connor he's shown really good flashes on the Steelers, but he's had a lot of injuries. And then Edmonds was the backup last year. And I think you mentioned it. The Cardinals' run game is just only really that good because Kyler Murray makes it good and scrambles out the pocket. They do a lot of read option, and Kyler keeps it and makes something out of nothing. So yeah, not too much to say on the Cardinals. But I think it will get interesting here in who you have at number 3, because I think ours will be different. But who do you have as the third best backfield in the NFC West?
So we talked about this a little bit. I went back and forth on this one. I think this is the hardest spot to kind of rank. Yeah. And I'm going to go with the Seahawks at 3. And This very well could be the Niners, honestly, because like the Niners backs, it's more about what they can be than what they have been. Like Raheem Mostert, in the short time he's played, has contributed. Jeff Wilson, in the short time he's played, has contributed. I think we all like Trey Sermon, but the problem is that none of them have showed over a long period of time that they are Chris Carson, who's legitimately a top 11, top 12 running back in the NFL. Like, he's a very good player. And even though I don't like paying running backs, he did earn the money he got. He's been a good player in the NFL. But I have the Seahawks 3, and it's mostly because I don't know if Rashad Penny is going to be the perfect number 2 back for them, coming off of his ACL injury and all of that. He struggled a little bit last year. Obviously, I actually don't think Travis Homer is that bad as a number 3 back. I think he's okay. DJ Dallas had a couple of pretty nice games for them last year, but I don't think that's anything to write home about. I think I like the Niners' overall depth better with Wilson, and I like Gallman, and obviously a lot of people like Elijah Mitchell, and I still haven't watched him, so I don't want to comment too much further on him. And I like Trey Sermon a lot and all of that. I think the overall depth is better with the Niners. So even though Carson's the best back, in my opinion, of the two teams, I'm going to go with Seattle at 3 because I don't trust their depth as much as I trust the Niners' depth.
Yeah, that's honestly fair. And I have the Niners at 3. And I think you brought up fair criticisms of the Seahawks. But end of day, mine was more of, okay, we're expecting like the number 1 and 2 guys to be healthy, but if they're not, then that's an issue. Because with the Niners, obviously, like Mostert is a really good running back when he's healthy, but he's constantly injured, and he hasn't been able to maintain his status as being just that electric guy when he's unhealthy with leg injuries, of course. And then the number 2 or 3 backs, or number 2, 3, and 4 backs, Jeff Wilson Jr., Sermon, Gallman, whatever order you want. We don't know with Sermon yet. I think he'll be really good on the Niners because of how explosive he is. Gallman and Jeff Wilson Jr., I think, are both solid backs who've proven they're pretty good. But end of day, like, there's no one there that can just take over a game completely in my mind. Like, Chris Carson has shown that ability, like, for multiple weeks to just dominate any team and be a top 10 running back at points in his career, where none of these guys on the Niners have shown that ability. And they also are running behind a way better scheme. So before you bring up yards per carry, whatever running backs on the Niners is going to have an insanely good yards per carry. That's the fact of the matter. High-end talent, I'd say Seahawks are better.
I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people bring up Raheem Mostert, right? Yeah, Raheem Mostert has had 2 or 3 phenomenal games in his career. Obviously, the NFC Championship is one of the all-time great performances by a running back. Raheem Mostert has 1 regular season 100-yard game in his career. Think about that. One regular season 100-yard game in his career. He's very explosive. He might be the fastest player in the NFL. He's a home run hitter. He's an incredible football player. But at the same time, Raheem Mostert has been massively overrated by Niners fans. If the Niners believe that Raheem Mostert was their bell cow and he would take them to the Super Bowl the way Terrell Davis took Mike Shanahan's teams to the Super Bowl, even with John Elway, you don't trade up to go draft Trey Sermon. Yeah. So, like, I understand when people say, oh, Raheem Mostert dominated because he had the excellent Ravens game and he was incredible versus the Packers. But the Niners' run game on the whole dominates. Like, Tevin Coleman, who a lot of people hate, did have that incredible divisional game versus the Vikings. So I think everything you said was fair. And Caleb Austin actually brings up the reason I was having the Niners at 2. And this is why I have the Niners above the Seahawks. And I have them just below the Rams only because I like a couple guys on the Rams. Maybe I'm crazy for liking those guys, but I think Kyle Juszczyk is kind of the trump card. I think he's so versatile and he's so good at what he does, and he's technically part of this running back core, where I think that's what really gives them the advantage over Seattle. I just wanted to touch on it running backs, but that was really what I wanted to say when we got to here to the Niners and why I have them at 2. And, Raheem Mostert's obviously explosive and a home run hitter when he's on the field. Trey Sermon looks the part. He looks like he's going to be something, especially he was very good at Ohio State. And I thought he was good at Oklahoma too, to be honest. I like Wayne Gallman. You like Wayne Gallman. I just think that, overall that they have this entire running back core with depth. And when you throw in Kyle Juszczyk, who to me is the standout player of this group, he's actually the best player by far of this group. Then I think their running back core is just a little bit better than Seattle's, just overall on the whole.
Yeah, and I didn't even mention him, and he's actually an insanely good pass catcher too, which out of the backfield, like you wouldn't really, I guess it's technically not part of the run game, but it's part of the play action game, and that's predicated off the running. So, and he's insanely good at pass catching and a really good blocker too, and that's honestly a great throw in there. So, I'm happy you mentioned him because Kyle Juszczyk is a really, really good fullback. But yeah, so is it mine for number 2 or yours for number 2?
Yours for number 2. I think you have Seattle.
Yeah, so I had Seattle. And like we've mentioned, like you could flip-flop the Seahawks or the Niners, but my main reason for going Seahawks was because of Chris Carson, as well as I think Rashad Penny's honestly a really underrated running back. Yes, he's not worth the first-round pick for the production he's put up. Yes, he did get injured last year and not really play. I don't even think he played at all or played very limited amount. But when he has played, he's been a really, really good number 2. And I would say replaced most of, if not all of the production of Chris Carson. But to go on more on Chris Carson, like obviously his style of football is the main reason he gets injured. He just tries to run over everyone that's in his way. But he is the best running back out of these two teams by, I think, a pretty fairly wide margin, in the sense that he has proven over time he can get 100-yard games. He can catch passes. And he's just an absolute menace with the ball in his hands. And then Penny's pretty good running the ball as well. So those two are the main reason. Now, if you were basing it more off just a whole and you knew these guys were probably going to get injured, yeah, of course, I'd rather have Gallman or Jeff Wilson Jr. over, say, Travis Homer or DJ Dallas. But I love Carson and Penny as a 1-2 punch, and I think it's really, really good. And the Seahawks run game has been solid over the years, and maybe it's because of the just sheer volume of carries these guys get. And then they do have a tight end too, Nick Bellore, or sorry, not tight end, fullback, who's pretty solid as well. So I have the Seahawks at 2, but you could argue Niners, and I couldn't disagree too much.
Yeah, and I think going with number 1, it's going to be a little shocking, but I'm just so high on this team's number 1 running back. I think he's going to be a top 6 or 7 back in the NFL, and that's why I'm going to have the Rams. And I think the rankings have come out where you have the Rams too. Mm-hmm. I'm a very big Cam Akers fan. I thought Cam Akers showed a lot as a rookie, and I think him and Darrell Henderson are a very, very underrated 1-2 duo. Like, I think Darrell Henderson, most people think of him as a bust because when they drafted him out of Memphis, people thought he was going to replace Todd Gurley, and now it looks like he's going to be the kind of the backup to Cam Akers. But he also had a 625 yards rushing last year. I think Darrell Henderson's actually a really good back. I like him a lot, and I really love Cam Akers. I think Cam Akers was the second best rookie back in the NFL. Thought he was better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I thought maybe Gibson, James Robinson, but I actually preferred Akers. Yeah. Behind Jonathan Taylor, to me, he was the second best back. I think he's a perfect fit for the Rams' run game. And I think they're going to run the ball effectively next year. I think they're going to have, especially with Matthew Stafford stretching the field. Like, I mean, Jared Goff, the fact that they kept running bootlegs and having him throw 5-6 yards in front of him, I think it was a problem because it restricted how they were defended. I think McVay is going to really be able to push the football down the field with Matthew Stafford and Tutu Atwell and Deshaun Jackson and Robert Woods and all of that, and that's going to really help their run game. I am very high on Cam Akers, and that's why I have them 1. Now, I might be wrong about this a year from now, but I'm a big Cam Akers fan, and so to me, they have the best running back core when you add him and Henderson together in the entire NFC West.
Yeah, so I had Cam Akers there too, and I'm happy you mentioned Henderson because he's actually I think he's a pretty solid back that people don't talk about, and he did a serviceable job early this year. But I know a lot of people would mention the Rams running game isn't as good as the Niners. We're basing it just off the running backs, not as the offensive running game as a whole, because that would factor in the O-line. And if you were to sit here and tell me that you think the Rams O-line is better than the Niners, I would say no chance. I wouldn't say McVay's maybe as good of a run schemer as Shanahan. That would be a fair argument as well, although I think McVay is a really good run game schemer. So I think the main reason with Akers is the fact that he kind of didn't pop off till the end of the season, but when he got his chances, when he got his moments, I think he'll be a top 10 running back this year. And it may be a bold take, but the way he was running last year was just honestly incredible. And having him and Henderson with hopefully a much improved passing game, that'll open up even more for him. So Cam Akers, I think, is probably the best running back overall in the NFC West, and that's why I have him there. But we have to see more out of him because he did only have 600 yards, but just the way he got them was probably the most impressive, I think.
Yeah, and what you said has to be discussed, right? Like, this is about the running backs. This isn't about the run game. Like, if you put Cam Akers on the 49ers, like, Cam Akers might have had 1,000 yards last year. Like, Shanahan's the best run game schemer in the NFL. Like, McVay's a good run game coordinator, but he's not on Shanahan's level. And so, like, that needs to be taken into account. Like, there's a reason Raheem Mostert has been on 5 different teams. And now he has this incredible story. He has this incredible career arc, and he's obviously an amazing person and all of that. But this scheme really saves running backs' careers. I mean, let's go through the guys that Mike Shanahan had success with: Tatum Bell, Olandis Gary, Clinton Portis, Terrell Davis. You can go down like 6 names that he had 1,000 yards rushing with. That tells you something where you do have to take into account, like, what's the player is actually capable of doing and what's the scheme doing for the player. And I'm with you. I think Chris Carson's phenomenal, and I still think Cam Akers will be the best running back in this division by far by the end of next year. Again, it's a projection. It could be wrong, but I'm very high on Cam Akers as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at what he did against just even a couple of the games that he played in, like against the Packers, 18 rushes for 90 yards. Against the Seahawks, 28 for 131. Against the Patriots, he had 29 rushes for 171 yards. And there's more games, too, where he's just dominating. But he didn't really get a chance to be, like, the feature guy until closer to the end of the year. And honestly, Vish, I would predict that he will be the feature guy. And with McVay, we saw what he did with Todd Gurley. He kind of ran him into the ground. But for a few years, Todd Gurley was in the MVP conversation. I want to say it was 2016, where maybe 17. But nonetheless, like, Todd Gurley was legitimately the best running back in the league. And I think he'll be I think Cam Akers can kind of be the feature back for this team. And I'm excited to see what they can do with Stafford at the helm now. And then hopefully their O-line can hold up. They still have Whitworth, who seems like he might play another 30 years just because of how old he actually is. But Akers is going to be exciting for the Rams.
I agree with you, but I think that he's going to be really, really good next year. I mean, I thought he looked great down the stretch. I really did.
Much agreed. But that's the running back. So I guess just to sum this up, we both had the Cardinals at 4th. I had the 49ers at 3rd. Vish had the Seahawks at 3rd. Vish had the 49ers at 2. I had the Seahawks at 2. And then we both had the Rams at 1 for backfield. So
we stand Cam Akers here.
Yeah, I guess we're big Cam Akers guys, but that's the running backs. And now this is probably, I think, the hardest ranking of them all. And ranking the receiving cores in the NFC West. Now, Vish, did you want to do it where we just did the top 3 and did it that way? Or did you want to do
top 3 receiving options, top 3 receivers? How do you want to do this? Because there's a lot of ways this can go, right? Like, if you include tight ends, like, there's only one team in this division that has a good tight end, and that team has a great one in George Kittle, obviously. So then, like, the Niners receiving core goes a totally different spot.
Yeah, I would say we could just do receiving options as a total. So the top 3 for receivers and tight ends combined. So that kind of changes stuff up a little bit. I think we'll both have the same number 1. Like, you can't really even argue it at all. But we can start with your list, Vish, if you want to. And who is your number 4 receiving core / options? And this is top 3, guys. So we're not going into the depths with the River Craycrafts and the Kevin Whites. We're just going top 3 for these teams. And I guess just to pull it up, I can just list off the top 3 options, Vish. Would that probably help and let everyone know, like, Sure. So, all right, we'll start with the Cardinals. So their top 3 receiving options are DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, and then Christian Kirk. You could throw in Rondale Moore, but we're not going to just because he's an unknown commodity at this point. For the Niners, it is Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. I think we all know that. For the Rams, I would say it's Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and then I would throw in Tyler Higbee as the third guy. You could have Deshaun Jackson, you could have Van Jefferson, but I would say Higbee's consistently up there and who I would put in there. And then for the Seahawks, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then you could either say Dwayne Eskridge, but I would say Gerald Everett, the former Rams tight end, who's actually pretty solid, and they picked him up this year. So, Vish, if you want to go with your number 4,
yeah, so there's really no number 4 because all of these teams have good weapons, especially when you go to the top 3. But at number 4, I'm going to go with Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Higbee. And the reason I say that is because to me, the other 3 have one standout guy that's an all-pro player. DK Metcalf, DeAndre Hopkins, George Kittle.
Mm-hmm.
To me, even though Robert Woods is like a top 12, top 13 receiver, Cooper Kupp is like a top 20 receiver, so both really, really good players. And Tyler Higbee is like a top 15, top 8, 12 tight end, so another solid player who's been good for them for a stretch. They just don't have that elite guy, and that's why they're number 4 in this division. I don't think there's a 4th place really in this division because we just rattled out lists where we got like 3 guys who I would say are in the top 25 players in the NFL. So 100%, I would say that the Rams have the 4th best top 3 receiving options in the NFL.
Okay, so I actually am going to agree with you on this one. Now, when we were doing this earlier, me and Vish were thinking like, okay, we're going to do all receivers. And that's when you think of the Rams and you're like, wait a minute. They have Woods, Kupp, Deshaun Jackson, Higbee, Van Jefferson, and Tutu Atwell. Like their depth is insane. But yeah, when you're only thinking of the top 3, like Kupp and Woods is one of the best 1-2 duos. But they're kind of missing that, like, as you mentioned, that just elite person where it's kind of hard for me to say, like, I would have them over a team with Hopkins or a team with DK Metcalf because Woods and Kupp are great, but they don't dominate game in and game out like those guys do. So for that reason, I would have the Rams at 4 as well. But I think depth-wise, like you could have the Rams like number 2 or maybe even number 1 if you're just basing it off of the whole roster because they have like 6 legitimate weapons on the outside. So that's who I'm going with at 4. But Vish, who do you have at 3?
Yeah, for me at 3, it's the Arizona Cardinals. And this is where like you have 3 teams with an elite option, right? Mm-hmm. DeAndre Hopkins is just an incredible receiver. He's one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in the NFL, like without a doubt. He's been that for the last 2 or 3 years. Incredible football player. I still think AJ Green has something left in the tank. He's one of my favorite receivers I've ever watched. Like I love AJ Green. And I thought that a lot of the problems with him last year, obviously he was still getting his feet wet. He was out for a couple of years with lower body injuries, but I think him and Joe Burrow just didn't connect on that wavelength the way Joe Burrow and, say, Jamar Chase did when he was in LSU. So I still think he has something left in the tank. And obviously Christian Kirk is a very, very defined ceiling player, but he's a very, very solid one. I just look at it and I say next to Hopkins, I would say they have the weakest 2 players out of the other 2 teams. So that's why I have Arizona at 3. Again, it feels weird having a last or a second to last with, this division because, again, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, that's an incredible trio of weapons. Again, AJ Green, DeAndre Hopkins, and Christian Kirk, I wouldn't call it incredible, but when you have a guy like DeAndre Hopkins and then you have that, it's a very, very, very good set of weapons too.
Yeah, so I don't want to agree with you on this one. I'm debating Cardinals and Seahawks, but I think I'm going to go Seahawks at 3. And the main reason is, so you stack them up, right? Like I'd say Hopkins is better than DK. I think Lockett's a lot better than AJ Green at 2, but Gerald Everett's where I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm that confident in him as the 3rd receiving option. He wasn't like insanely good on the Rams. He was the backup to Higbee, and Higbee was the better receiver. And that's where I say, okay, Christian Kirk or even Rondale Moore, I would say are a good amount better than him, where I would rather have the Cardinals. But the Seahawks, just to talk about them, because they are my 3, like DK Metcalf is clearly one of the best receivers in the league, top 10, bar none. Like you can't argue otherwise. Lockett is very, very good with Russell Wilson. Do I think he would be as good without Wilson? No. I think him and Russell's chemistry aids him in being really good. Now, he is a really good receiver, but do I think he's top 15? Probably not. Top 20? Yeah, you would say that. So they definitely have a really good tandem, but the third piece for the Seahawks is where it just falls very, very far. Now, they did draft Dwayne Eskridge, and I think he could be something. They drafted him in the third round. Gerald Everett was honestly a solid pickup, but not having a third guy that's who I think is reliable in any sort of way really, really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. So that's why I'm going with the Seahawks at 3, but I could honestly completely understand them having them at 2.
Yeah, so let me elaborate on that because I have them at 2. I think that obviously I agree with you. DK Metcalf is an all-pro wide receiver. He's, in my opinion, not just 10. He's one of the 5 or 6 best receivers in the NFL. He's an absolute weapon. He's unbelievable. I know what you're talking about with Tyler Lockett. Like, talent-wise, I don't think he's as good as Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, or he's maybe better than AJ Green and Christian Kirk. I think what sets Tyler Lockett apart, and this is why I used to think, if you remember, you and I, one of the things we used to really agree on when we were little is how good Jordy Nelson was. And that's why I think it's kind of the same thing where I'm really high on Tyler Lockett because he has a special connection with Russell Wilson. And I think that goes a long way. Like, sure, if you put him on another team, he might not be this good of a player. He might be slightly worse, but he's not on another team. He's with Russell Wilson. And with Russell Wilson, he's an incredible wide receiver. It's just same thing with Aaron Rodgers and Jordy Nelson. They have a special wavelength, a special chemistry, a special ability to find each other and just make plays. And so then you bring up Gerald Everett, right? And it is a fall off. I still think that is a number 3 option isn't terrible. I actually think it's pretty solid, and it was a good pickup. I think Gerald Everett is such an athletic tight end that we might see the best of Gerald Everett a bit more next year because I think the way the Seahawks offense works and who they have on the outside might open up some things for Gerald Everett, especially because he won't be sharing touches with Higbee. I don't know. I'm a little bullish on Jared Everett on the Seahawks. So to me, that 3 is actually, to me, definitively above Arizona. I think Arizona and the Rams, to me, is closer than them to Seattle.
Definitely. But yeah, I mean, you can't really go wrong either way just because of it's tough to say, like, I guess what you value more. Would you rather have maybe a better top 2, but that third guy is not really that great? Or would you rather have the elite 1 and then maybe the 2 and 3 aren't as good as the number 2, but the third guy is way, way better than Gerald Everett? But to each their own, but Vish. So I guess we covered both our 2 and 3. Who do you have at 1? I think I know who you have at 1.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. It's the 49ers. I think that if you talked about depth, they're certainly not 1. Like the Rams, and the Rams are certainly not 4. But if you're saying top 3, I think George Kittle might be the best individual player of all these guys.
Maybe
him or DeAndre Hopkins. It's right there.
Yeah.
And then Ayuk obviously had an incredible rookie season. And, you know, he might not yet be a better receiver than DK Metcalf. But, I mean, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, I don't know how much of those guys are better than him if they are. And Deebo Samuel, same thing. They're all in that same conversation. The Niners have 2 guys right there with George Kittle, who's that special guy. I think that's the best trio of receiving options. Again, if this was a depth conversation, it would be a little different, but I don't think it is a depth conversation. I think Brandon Ayuk is very, very talented. I'm very, very high on the prospects of Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, anybody who's heard me talk, Deebo Samuel is my favorite player in the NFL. I think he's incredible. I think he can carry offenses, and I think he has carried the Niners offense in the past quite a bit. Like, both Rams games last year were won by Deebo Samuel. So, and then George Kittle, obviously, what do you need to say about George Kittle? He's a top 4 or 5 player in the entire NFL. So for that reason, I think they're by far the best trio.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I also had them at 1. I think you hit on it too. Like, if you're going with depth, like, yeah, the Seahawks or the Niners might not even be number 1, but when you cut it down to the top 3, the main guys on your offense who are driving it in the passing game, like, Kittle, just not even passing wise, like blocking wise, might be the best blocking tight end in the league, or at least a top 5 one. So that opens up there. And then as a receiving threat, obviously after the catch, like, I would say he's probably the best tight end after the catch. Now, he might not get open as much as Kelsey does because Kelsey's route running and hands are, I'd say, the best for a tight end. But after the catch and just, obviously like breaking tackles and stuff, you could have Kittle at 1, and I would agree with that. And yeah, when you compare Kittle with the other number ones, it's tough to say who's a better receiving option between him and Hopkins and Metcalf because they're going up against different people. Kittle's going up against linebackers and safeties, the other two corners. But regardless, Kittle dominates his matchups similarly to how Metcalf and Hopkins do. And then I think where you start to think of the Niners is the second and third. Whether you have Kittle or Ayuk at 2 and 3 doesn't matter to me, but that third guy, if you say have Debo, like when you compare Debo to who the Seahawks have, he blows all of them out the water. I think he's miles and bounds better than Everett, than Higbee, than Kirk or AJ Green. So that's where with the Niners, you think they have the elite number 1 and then their number 2 and 3 are both really, really good. So that's why I think the Niners are number 1. I think you'll agree with me on that. The fact that their number 3 is just way better than any of the other number 3s.
Right. And I'm with you. And just to recap, I think we had the same list. No, we didn't have the same list. So we both had the Rams 4. I had Seattle 2. You had Seattle 3. I had the Cardinals 3. You had the Cardinals 2. And then we both had the Niners 1. So that's what we think of the NFC West receiving corps. Obviously, we rank the quarterbacks. We rank the running back groups, not the run games, the running back groups. We talked a little bit about Julio Jones. That was our show today. Let's answer Jamal's question here real quick. So Jamal, my man, shout out to Jamal, one of the best people out there. He's asking us, do you think Sermon will challenge Akers as the best running back in the division by the end of the year?
I can go first on this. I think Sermon needs to challenge Mostert as the best running back on the team before he can challenge Akers, because we don't even know if Sermon will start. Now, we still have, obviously, training camp, OTAs, all that fun offseason jazz, but we don't know how Sermon will be in the next level. Now, he had a few very, very dominant games for Ohio State. I think his most famous one was Northwestern, where he had over 300 yards.
300.
Yeah, so he's shown the ability to just be insane. And I know one thing that I keep harping on with him and why I like him as a fit is his 10-yard burst is unbelievable. And his 40 time is actually a little slower than you would think for a running back, but his first 10 yards, he was a track guy, and his first 10 yards are just unreal fast. And I think when you're hitting a hole or need to get somewhere in a quick pace, and the first 10 yards is kind of the most important for a running back, because what's the point of being able to hit a home run touchdown if you can't actually get through get to the point where you're in the open field? And that's where Sermon will be great. But I guess we just have to see it because we haven't seen him play in the NFL, and he was a little inconsistent at Ohio State and not always their bell cow, and the fact that he doesn't have a ton of games of just pure dominance. So he could really, really be that great. But we've seen what Akers has done in the NFL, and he's just bullied teams, mainly the Patriots, when he had over 180 yards in a single game. And I'm excited to see. But, yeah, I think Sermon needs to get through Mostert first. But it'll be interesting to see how it does stack up. How he's
I'm gonna be totally objective here and just give my real thoughts. I'm gonna say no. I thought Cam Akers was a better running back coming out of the draft than Trey Sermon was. Cam Akers is better in short areas. I think he has better second year in terms of speed. Cam Akers also has an incredible burst, which you talked about. Trey Sermon's burst is incredible. I think Trey Sermon tends to run high sometimes, which for whatever reason, the Niners seem to like running backs that run high, which is odd given that Frank Gore is the greatest running back in the history of this franchise. And the thing that separated Frank Gore from everybody at 205 pounds was his pad level. But I mean, you look at Tevin Coleman, Raheem Mostert, Matt Breida, Jet McKinnon, Trey Sermon, they all run high. Joe Williams, they all run kind of high. So I think that's one other thing. I think that they both obviously have good contact balance and all of that. But I just think Akers was a better running back coming out of Florida State, and how good he looked in the NFL, especially down the stretch of last season. Again, I'm very high on Cam Akers. So that's just how I feel about it. I think Trey Sermon can be really good, but I think Cam Akers can be one of the 7 or 8 best running backs in the NFL. I don't know if I think Trey Sermon can be that. I think Trey Sermon can be a really good player, but being one of the 7 or 8 backs in the NFL, I mean, you're talking he's amongst names like Nick Chubb and Saquon Barkley and Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon and
Aaron
Josh Jacobs,
Jones.
Aaron Jones. That's where I think Cam Akers can be, like the bottom of that list. I don't know if Trey Sermon can be there, even though he's part of this great run scheme and all of that. So for that reason, I'm going to say no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see though, because obviously, like Sermon's probably going to have an easier time running the ball because he has Trent Williams and Banks and a ton of really good O linemen. Where the Rams O line probably is not as good as the Niners, and they don't have the tight end of Kyle Juszczyk, who's also a really good fullback, and then the blocking of Kittle is probably better than Higbee. So Sermon will have the opportunity to produce. So good question though, Jamal, and happy you could stop by. But there was one other thing. Sorry.
I'm late.
Dad.
Quick yes or no on getting Julio. So, I mean, we're going to repost this, so you can definitely go back and watch. I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it, but the short answer is we both said no. But I would recommend, obviously, nobody wants to say no to Julio Jones. He's a Hall of Famer. So I would recommend that you go back and watch what we had to say, because then it'll make more sense. Because even I don't feel comfortable saying, hey, don't get Julio Jones.
Yeah.
Don't trade for a future Hall of Famer, one of the greatest receivers in NFL history, even though he's available.
But yeah, definitely. And yeah, so that's all we had planned for today's episode. Thank you guys for stopping by, and drop a comment on the video or in the stream on whether you guys like this sort of thing. We've done rankings in the past that have done really well, but this is a little different, ranking within divisions. So yeah, just let us know if you want, like, say maybe you want the AFC North or AFC West or whatever division or whatever skill group. You know, we'd be happy to do D-lines or linebacking crew or secondary. So just let us know, or maybe like position wide, like just ranking our top 10 quarterback list or running back list, whatever you guys want. We'd be happy to do that. But I do think that'll wrap up this, unless you have anything else, Fish.
Right. And then just comment also on that question. Brandon Vincent, I want to say his name was. He asked about a little more technical football stuff. Obviously, that takes a little more time for us to do rather than just doing it on our own and then coming back here to talk about it. But if you guys really, really want that, we will obviously adjust our schedule and do that. But overall, guys, thank you for watching. As Blake said, please like, subscribe, share. It was incredible to be back. That 1 week off was nice. But we'll definitely be back soon streaming. I'll be back with Grant, I think, tomorrow. It'll probably be in the afternoon because I start working tomorrow, but we'll see you guys soon.